Ukraine is reporting that Russia has deployed a fully autonomous drone weapon system to the battlefield. Is SKYNET finally here? And what can Ukraine do about it? Plus, we're going to talk about the Russian economy, more signs that Vladimir Putin's war machine is starting to come apart at the bolts. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is a crazy story that I think is really important for a couple of reasons. In fact, you should probably mark your calendars on the day you heard about the first fully autonomous weapon system. And this is Russia field testing, which is code for testing on the battlefield, a new AI-powered drone that has, of course, an NVIDIA chip inside of it because, well, sanctions are worthless. And the fact is that this drone is reportedly referred to as by its classified designation is MS-001. And according to a Ukrainian intelligence officer, the MS-001 is able to see, analyze, decide, and strike without external commands. It has thermal vision, real-time telemetry. It can operate as part of a swarm. And what makes this so crazy is that it relies on a $250 generative AI computer that NVIDIA just revealed last December. So the Russia is almost certainly purchasing them using shell companies in non-sanctioned countries and then smuggling them over the border. Relatively easy to do and likely at pretty limited cost. But what's insane is, again, you can stick this small generative AI chip in and likely train it on a data set that Russia has been collecting in its Shahed drone strikes for the last several years, right? We've heard from Ukrainian sources, including photographic evidence, that the Shaheds have cameras on them now. And the thinking at the time was that these cameras must be to broadcast back to an operator, a human operator who's guiding the Shahed to its target. But it seems like what Russia was likely also doing was gathering strike data. When a human, right, trains a Shahed to hit a target, what it's doing is recording that and is going to feed it into an AI model that's going to use that as training data for this Shahed to operate independently of any kind of external control. What makes this so dangerous is that while conventional Shaheds already sort of operate and strike autonomously, the fear is that these Shaheds will be able to be deployed and cannot be jammed, and they will be able to navigate around situations, navigate around air defenses, and enter combat zones, particularly where they can find, identify, and strike critical targets at essentially any depth. Because that's the real fear, is not that it will hit an apartment building in Kiev, is that the Shahed will be trained, for example, to recognize what a Ukrainian repair depot looks like. It'll be trained to recognize the signs of a potential ammunition storage area, a potential training ground, essentially meaning that these autonomous drones could blanket the skies of Ukraine and simply always, on a nightly, daily basis, be continually overhead, scanning for anything that looks like it could be a gathering of Ukrainian military forces. This is sort of, again, the SKYNET. This is the SKYNET fear, right? Now, obviously, it's going to be hard for Russia to scale this up, but not that hard, given the fact that the tool that makes these things, the heart and brain of this SKYNET Shahed, this Terminator Shahed, is a $250 chip, essentially, from NVIDIA, from a U.S. company, by the way, which should also sort of aggravate you, even though since 2020, the U.S. has claimed to have banned advanced chip exports to Russia and blacklisted Russian buyers. Well, it still is eminently clear that Russia is purchasing these through shell companies in Hong Kong, China, Singapore, and Turkey. About $17 million in NVIDIA hardware has passed through gray market routes in 2023, and likely these diversion networks are ramping up because, again, in the last 2 years, AI has become much, much more powerful and much more effective. Its uses are people understand on a much more granular level both what they can do and how to make them do it. So this is pretty disturbing stuff, but it's not the only fully autonomous Russian drone that they've got in the pipes. You can see here that the V2U autonomous loitering munition also reportedly is using AI to navigate and strike targets and may have the same swarm capability. So essentially, it seems like these are different platforms for the same core system, right? You might recall Russian loitering munitions are a little bit different, right? They fly overhead for long periods of time, usually closer to the front lines, constantly looking for strikes. Again, similar to these Shaheds. And while the Shaheds go deep into the Ukrainian territory, these are likely going to be less deep but have longer sort of loiter times. The Ukrainians' military intelligence first published the information about the V2U on June 9th, saying it spotted the drone actually last year at a event in Russia. But the fact is that these are being tested, data is being gathered. In fact, here's footage of the Ukrainians showing this loitering munition already deployed to the battlefield. And this is really, again, a case study in just the Russian way of war, relying on cheap, mass-produced AI systems, where it reportedly uses a simple electric motor made in China, powered by Chinese batteries, and a range of around 100 kilometers. Again, likely powered by a small a competitor to NVIDIA's $250 chip. And this is all very, very cheap, but highly effective. Now, before we talk about the fact that this Russian war economy has a big incentive to try to do things cheaper because, well, it's kind of collapsing at the seams, I want to mention that you guys probably know that as on this channel, the more I talk about controversial issues, the more I show the reality of combat, the more YouTube likes to demonetize me. And that means I rely on you guys to enable me to do this every single day. So if you want to keep me and the team able to give you guys content 7 days a week, you want to become a member at combatvetnews.com. You guys know I just had my second kid, and luckily everybody is happy, everybody is healthy. But my biggest fear was that something would happen, that I would have to be in the hospital with my wife or child for a long time. That would mean that both we would have huge medical bills and I wouldn't be able to make videos. And so the thing that I knew that you guys had my back, and that no matter what happened, that you guys would enable me and my family to stay afloat. So thank you guys who are members of Combat Vet News. Of course, if you want access to the uncensored combat videos, the kind that YouTube definitely won't let me show, including the exclusive stuff sent to me from units on the front line. In fact, I just got a crazy video of from one of the units basically rolling out technology that I have never seen before. If you want to take a look at that this week, you want to become, again, a member at any one of these tiers. So thanks to you guys. If you want to join, of course, the link is in the description. So you should click it, sign up, and get access to, again, hundreds of the uncensored combat videos that YouTube just would never in a million years let me show you. Okay. So there's a lot of evidence that Vladimir Putin's war economy and war political economy isn't going so hot. One, we have another victim of Putin's what increasingly looks like a systematic purge. This is the Russian Minister of Transport and former governor of Kursk region, reportedly, again, taking his own life, but in all likelihood, again, this is after he had been removed from his position as Minister of Transportation. And that makes sense because, well, in case you guys didn't know, Ukraine used fairly large trucks or commercial trucking vehicles to deploy their autonomous drones, not once, but actually at least twice that we know about, against in systematic strikes against Russian airfields, strategic targets out of the range of normal conventional drones. Someone had to go for this total humiliation. But even worse still, reportedly, Ukrainian drones are able to strike Russian rail lines as well, systematically dismantling them. And we've seen, for example, that Russians are now having to field armored trains and deploy troops onto those trains with anti-air weapons simply to try to defend them somewhat against these drone strikes. So given the fact that Ukraine is demonstrating capabilities against Russian targets that have essentially never been protected, it makes sense that Vladimir Putin's going to disappear, fire, and then unalive his Minister of Transport, sending a message to the others in his administration that this sort of failure will not be tolerated. But as we know, sometimes these sort of purges can backfire because let's say you are a popular, charismatic Russian general who runs afoul of Putin for something as minor, again, as not thinking to put armored plating on your trains or whatever. Well, you're going to go, listen, I'm going to be purged no matter what. So I might as well try to take Putin out. It's my only real path to livelihood. And when you look around at other generals, and all of them say the same thing, which is eventually that's going to be me. I'm going to be the unalived minister. You can get the one thing a dictator fears more than anything else, which is a small consensus among his subordinates that it's time for him to go, right? And so this, I think, it has the potential to backfire. But again, Vladimir Putin, it's worth noting, has stayed in power for decades, and he hasn't done so by being unsophisticated with his use of force. But he's also never faced a crisis of this level, because it's not just embarrassing defeats at the hands of the Ukrainians, which, don't get me wrong, the Russians are very much continuing to advance on the battlefield. I don't want to create this non-reality based expectation of the state of the battlefield. And things are very hard for Ukraine. We've talked about that. But again, inside of Russia, things are not all well. For example, Vladimir Putin, despite, remember, earlier a couple months ago, the Russian government said that they recruited literally record numbers of Russians to fight in Ukraine in 2024. And this is, of course, transparently a lie, because, one, the official Russian government says that they've lost hardly any soldiers in Ukraine, which is weird that you would still need 700,000 new recruits for a conflict, which, again, the official Russian numbers are that they have taken like less than 100,000 casualties. But Putin is now responding to that record recruitment by signing a law allowing any person without Russian citizenship to sign a contract with the Russian Armed Forces for military service. Now, this has probably always been sort of de facto the case, as we've seen. But what's fascinating is that literally, guys, basically 6.9 billion human beings are qualify as person without Russian citizenship. So he's essentially throwing the door open here to say, listen, if you want to make a couple extra bucks for your family in Uganda, in Bangladesh, in Chile, right? Just come on down to Moscow and we will get you kitted up and sent on your merry one-way trip to the front lines. That's not what you do when your recruitment efforts are going great, okay? But also, the Russian economy is starting to, even some of its most fundamental crops, like potatoes, are looking pretty cooked. In fact, food prices for potatoes are out of control. And in fact, it's a really kind of bizarre situation, as we talk about on this channel, that the Russian economy, the potato shortage is a really emblematic confluence of two huge problems facing Russia. One is that it is a staple crop. It is sort of like the Russian version of eggs. I mean, Russians use a lot of eggs too. They love bread, but since even before Soviet times, the potato just grows really well in Russia, and Russia just really relies on it as a staple food product. It's also, of course, a core ingredient in vodka, as you may recall. But shortages have pushed prices up nearly twofold, the biggest rise in any single food products. And Putin admitted that, quote, it turns out we don't have enough potatoes. During a meeting in May, he said, quote, I spoke with Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko, and he said, quote, we've sold everything to Russia. By the way, guys, in case you're wondering about the what it means to be a Russian satellite state, this is totally emblematic of exactly that. When the Kremlin needs something, he simply calls Lukashenko and says, give me every potato you've got. And Lukashenko says, yes, sir, right away, sir. Happy to do so, sir. That's not what you want. You don't want your country that is simply looted by Moscow when you have something it needs. And that's what it means to be a Russian satellite. That's one of the reasons why the Ukrainians, one of many reasons the Ukrainians don't want to be turned into a Russian proxy state. But here's the problem, is that in order to grow a crop of potatoes, you need two things. You need potatoes, fertilizer, but you also need people. You need someone to pick the potatoes. You can see here, there's at least 3 dudes harvesting potatoes in this picture. And most notably, all of them are, at least by Russian standards, military-aged men, right? So when you need the thing that Russia has been killing off systematically, which is able-bodied males, that it makes sense. You're going to experience a tremendous labor shortage, especially because the Russians who are most likely to find harvesting potatoes to be good work are going to be the same ones who have been recruited first by the Russian military. So not only is it a struggle to afford the fertilizer and other sort of key inputs of potatoes, but you also have a difficulty in finding people to plant and then harvest them, especially profitably, right? So again, as we've talked about on this channel, officially Russia says its inflation rate is a paltry 10%, but the government, in an effort to control inflation, has the rate set to 21%, and it's fairly clear that Vladimir Putin has ordered them not to raise that rate regardless of what happens. So the fact that inflation is still out of control, and the fact that you see things like this, again, a critical food product up nearly 200% over the past year, not since the start of the invasion, over the past year, is a clear indicator that, again, this, it says, is the official inflation rate, and this darker blue line is the food inflation rate. You can see that these are starting to bifurcate, where they've tracked pretty soundly with each other, and especially lately, you can see here that officially the Russian inflation rate in the last quarter has declined, according to the Russian government, whereas the price of food has actually continued to increase, which is really weird and unusual, and not necessarily unheard of, but it's pretty bizarre. Almost nowhere else in the chart do you see the food and general inflation rate move in opposite directions like this. And this is really a sign that I think that the Russian government is lying, manipulating statistics in order to look better than it is, and that this food stuff likely reflects the true inflation rate, of 13%. I suspect the reality for most Russians is that it's actually worse than that. Again, this article quotes the Russian economic minister saying, we've already heard that we're basically already on the brink of falling into a recession. Right. And again, according to a fellow at the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, said, quote, slowing economic growth coupled with high inflation leaves Russia close to stagflation. But also, here's the thing. The Russian government up until this point has depended on robust oil revenues in order to subsidize, essentially, its entire war economy. But crude oil continues to drop. And as we've talked about, the Iranian actions, right? Iran is definitely an ally of Russia, and some of Iran's aggression, particularly its threats to close the Strait of Hormuz to oil traffic, might have had Vladimir Putin's fingerprints on it. At least that action would have benefited the Kremlin tremendously, because every time it happens, right? Every time there's a crisis like this, the price of crude oil rises relative to the dollar. Bear in mind, guys, the dollar is actually at its weakest in 25 years. So if you were to compare it to, say, a more generic global basket of currencies, the price of oil would look actually even worse. I wonder if I can get the price of oil in rubles. Let's see. Urals oil price data. Ooh, maybe. All right, Urals crude USD. Oh, it's still USD denominated. That's okay. That's okay. You can see the same chart, though, playing out here in the one-year chart, that the crude oil basically has been unable to be stabilized at any price point. You can see here's a spike right around the time that Iran and Israel were really going at it 3 weeks ago. Now you can see that now that things have settled and it's clear that the flow of oil is not going to be disrupted, you can see that it's returning to its low baseline. So essentially, I think Vladimir Putin is running out of tricks to stabilize oil prices. Again, you can see here a sort of low point. He tried to, again, the Iran-Israel war really benefited Russia at a time where Russia really needed it, guys. The timing was unbelievably fortuitous for Vladimir Putin. And so the fact is that this happened. It spiked oil prices, but now they're back to falling. And it's probably a sign that for old Vladdy Daddy, his number one best economic driver, the thing that's going to enable him to keep this war going, is starting to sputter out, right? Now, again, that doesn't mean that Ukraine isn't having its own issues economically, but critically, the Ukrainian people are fighting for their freedom, sort of like North Vietnam and the Vietnam War, that even though they might be smaller, they might be less economically large, at least, their commitment to fighting and winning is more than offsets the Russian sort of lackadaisical approach to this war. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thanks to the Colonel tier members like James J21, Yanko Georgiev, Chris Gorsuch, Paul Templeton, Cytronic, Steve Moran, TR Need, Alan Nuts, and CM Holmes, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do it without you guys. Be sure to join us on Combat Vet News tomorrow. Literally, we're dropping another video of exclusive combat footage, wild technology that I haven't seen anywhere else. See ya. Cheers.